I'm curious what your reaction is to the president's meeting with Google CEO Sundar Pichai, or at least his tweet about it, given that state attorneys general have launched at least a preliminary exploration into whether Google should be probed over antitrust and privacy concerns.
Well, I wasn't privileged to the discussion that the president had, and I would guess that it mainly surrounded Google's activity in China. I don't know, I haven't heard that they discussed any of its practices as it relates to data mining, the use of data mining, the manipulation in the digital ad space, and content suppression, all of which you mentioned earlier. So what we have here are different layers of problems all surrounding big tech as a whole. And these are issues that attorney generals around the country on both sides of the aisle have been discussing for quite some time now. This is not new to us. This is a discussion that we have been having as we not only are the chief legal officers of each of our particular states, but we also are tasked with protecting consumers in each of our states.
What are the issues that you are most concerned about, and what kind of action do you think needs to be taken?
Well, I think all of the issues that have been brought up concern me equally. I would tell you that each of them have a different take. Some of them have an antitrust avenue. Others have an unfair trade practices avenue as well. We were scheduled to discuss some of these issues with the FTC last week. That meeting has been postponed, and my understanding is they're rapidly trying to reschedule that particular meeting. When it comes to the digital advertising space, that, I'll give you that as an example, could be both an antitrust and an unfair trade practice area.
So are you part of this inquiry that I mentioned where attorneys general are now looking into whether Google warrants a probe on antitrust and privacy issues?
Look, we have had a number of discussions with additional attorney generals, again, on both sides of the aisle. Each of us are looking at some of the same things and some additional issues where you mentioned content suppression as well. We are absolutely looking at big tech as a whole to determine what avenues may be appropriate in ensuring that our consumers are protected.
Google has, responded to this preliminary exploration saying privacy and security are built into all of our products, and we will continue to engage constructively with state attorneys general on policy issues. Republicans and conservatives have historically not wanted to regulate big business. How serious do you think conservatives are right now about regulating big tech, and what makes this situation different from historical situations?
Well, first of all, let's not confuse what Google said. Of course, Google, as well as everyone else out there in the industry that collects data on consumers, is concerned about the privacy of that particular data. That is not at all what the bigger picture of what attorney generals around the country are looking at. The question to Google is, what are you doing with the data that you're collecting? Does the consumer know what you're collecting on them? Are they getting the benefit? Is there a quid pro quo in that? And should consumers be getting more out of what you're collecting from them? On top of that, is the data that Google is collecting from the consumer, is that proprietary to the consumer? That's one particular field. Then the next question is whether or not Google is manipulating the digital ad space. Are they controlling it in a way that basically would be unfair? When you look at the big picture in the digital advertising space, the question I would pose is, would the FTC allow Chase or Goldman Sachs to own the NASDAQ? The answer to that would be absolutely not. They wouldn't allow them to own the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. Yet that's exactly what Google does in the digital advertising space.
So what do you think about privacy then in particular, and what role states should play in enforcing a federal privacy bill?
Well, again, the question when you talk about privacy, that's a very broad subject. Are you talking about whether, how individual companies protect the data that they already have? Or are you talking about being open and transparent with the consumer as to what you're collecting from them?
Now, when it comes to political bias, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, when he was Attorney General last year, called a meeting of you and your peers to talk about conservative bias on tech platforms. Do you believe some of these tech platforms are deliberately subverting conservative voices?
Well, I could tell you that some of the actions that I've seen on the big tech platform certainly raise that particular issue. The question, I have seen it, we have seen it time and time again when they have suppressed conservative content. We report it to them, we take action or ask them about it or inquiry, and of course it's always an apology from their standpoint. But again, at some point in time, when the mistake is made again and again and again, there becomes evidence that there is content suppression. I think that the concern that Senator Ted Cruz has raised could be real, and that's what we're hoping to find out.
Speaking of Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Elizabeth Warren, both of them, Elizabeth Warren has advocated for the breakup of big tech. Ted Cruz has said, well, she has a good point. What you just said about not wanting Goldman or JP Morgan to own the NASDAQ sort of reminds me of that. I mean, what do you make of their arguments to break up big tech?
Look, it's certainly a possibility. I think it may be a road that may have to be traveled on. I think that attorney generals around the country are leaving all of the tools in the toolbox in an effort to try to cure some of the problems that we're seeing. You know, again, we're talking about a virtual marketplace that the average consumer has a hard time wrapping their heads around. But when you go to the digital ad space, look, I'll give you an example. I was trying to purchase a cover for a dog bed that I have. I had this large lap. He destroyed his dog bed. I didn't need the mattress. I just needed the cover. I went into the field and searched dog cover and the manufacturer. What I got on the first page was that the covers were all out of stock and I'd have to buy the entire bed. Knowing what goes on in a digital marketplace, I went to the second and third page and found the cover I was looking for. The question is Google purposely doing that? Are they driving consumers to more expensive avenues that they're not exactly looking for? Consumers have come to have an expectation that when you search for a particular product, that what they're getting is quality and maybe quantity and service. And that's what we're trying to determine, whether or not the consumer's expectation is meeting what eventually comes out of the search.